What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Logos Podcast. This is Max.
This is Joey.
And on today's episode, we've got something cooking for y'all. Hit him with it. Oh, what's mine? Right? Yeah, dude. Kamehameha or Kamehameha.
Wakanda Forever.
Yeah. And then this one, they don't say anything, right?
No, for the
Namor just
yeah.
chills.
We're talking about Black Panther.
Oh, yeah.
Black
That's
Panther
right,
movie.
Right. The new Black Panther movie, Wakanda Forever.
Mm-hmm.
And also the other place under the ocean, right? Talocan.
The underwater city.
Talocan, that's right. So we've heard a lot of hype around this movie.
Yeah. You know, someone recently told me that they thought it was the best Marvel movie yet.
Now that is quite the statement.
I know. So that's really why we're talking about it.
Yeah.
Is because I heard that claim. I've heard a lot of buzz about it. I saw it this past weekend, so I was like, yeah, Max, let's talk about this movie.
Yeah, sure. And actually, it actually forced me to kind of be attentive. And to be honest with you, I'm not up to date on everything Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
There's also been so much of it. I just don't have the time or even the desire to kind of watch it all and stay up to date to it. But I think I have watched the first one of the Black Panther series and then this new one. And there's a connection. There's also deviances in it from the first, and I think even from the Marvel comics. We're going to talk about Marvel because we do think it has great connections to things like religiosity.
There are good themes.
And there's
themes.
Ritual, ancestry, death after life.
Yeah.
And so those themes are more familiar to our kind of purview of study. And
and which I just have to mention too, like Marvel, what's cool about the Marvel movies, and I think the reason they're so popular is because they have a very religious imagination behind them.
Yeah, right.
Like all these movies draw on mythology and archetypal, religious imagery, a lot from Christianity. So there's a lot of I watched all the movies from Iron Man to Avengers Endgame a few summers ago with my sister, and I've kind of stopped there. I haven't really kept up since then, and I think they're getting worse and worse as they go.
Yeah. Quite the claim. You better back it up here in a little bit.
Yeah. So they should have stopped at Avengers Endgame. That's my claim. But there's a reason that so many like Avengers Endgame was one of the highest grossing films ever, if not the highest grossing film ever. And it's because like the producers of Marvel are not dumb. They know what draws the human heart, right? They know what attracts us. It's these religious mythological stories.
Sure.
And also themes of life, death. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, and they're also like up to date on like contemporary psychology, and these producers are not just coming out of nowhere with these ideas, like you said. That archetypal structures that they're kind of putting together that obviously are attractive to us because these movies are grossing at billions of dollars. And it's like there must be something good, touching, and kind of universal in that sense that man's kind of attracted to in these storylines. And I think this movie is one of the reasons why it's so popular in that sense. Obviously, it's a high-budget movie, but it also kind of, in its production, underwent a very difficult death, right? So King T'Challa, formerly, what's his name?
Chadwick Boseman.
Yeah, so Chadwick passed away previous to kind of the production of the second movie.
Yeah,
and that is a big hit.
That's hard.
To
it's hard to
film.
make a follow up.
Right.
When your lead is dead.
And he arguably is one of the best actors in that movie.
He's good. I liked him a lot as an actor.
He was a great actor. And so it's like all of a sudden you have to kind of mold things together, shape everything around. Your main character is. And so that's a tough loss, and that's hard for the producer, the directors, and everybody involved in the team to kind of compose all of a sudden a new storyline here.
But because of that, we'll get into this eventually. But just to mention it now because you brought up Chadwick Boseman, the whole movie is really colored by this theme of death, of grappling with death, which is fitting in light of the loss of Chadwick Boseman.
Yeah, it is.
Like that's and in a way I think they paid good tribute to him through this movie.
Yeah, and I do think that this idea of death throughout the movie was, for the most part, like solemn in the sense of like it was respected, both because of the Chadwick actually passed away, but I think even just in the movie itself, like the characters and the way that the characters throughout the movie died. By the way, there will be spoilers. We should have said to begin with.
We're definitely going to spoil this movie.
So if you haven't watched it,
pause this episode of Logos Podcast.
Take it easy.
Go watch Wakanda Forever, then go to patreon.com/lovespodcast.
Well done.
Donate, support our project, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, like, share, subscribe, comment, the whole 9.
The whole 8 even.
And then come back and unpause this episode and keep listening.
It is a long movie, so you may have to put your computer on sleep or something.
Which is one of my critiques. But okay, before we get into all that,
let's do it.
First impressions of this movie for you. Like, you walk out of the theater, what are the first things you're thinking?
Can I be honest with you?
Yes.
Okay, I want to be honest with you, okay? My first impression was that movie was too long, and it was kind of boring.
Yeah.
And I was, in my mind, I was like, okay, I was kind of lost in the storyline. I thought it was very fragmented, right? These are kind of some of my critiques here already coming about. But like, I thought the story was very fragmented. I wasn't as invested in Namor, for example, as I think the producer wanted me to be.
Yeah.
I thought he was a bit forced, kind of out of left field, out of the water, not even the field, right? Out of left water field. And so I kind of left like trying to kind of put the puzzle pieces together. However, the ending of the movie itself was good, was warm, was well connected. I think the very end was, but I do think that the movie was maybe 20 or 30 minutes too long.
Yeah.
You know, when they could have kind of tightened the narrative a little bit. That being said, some of the things that I did like kind of more immediately were the music. I mean, I've been listening to the soundtrack. I thought the soundtrack. I like the way they appropriate the music to like the cultural shifts in the cinematography that's going on. So they change frames, and all of a sudden the music changes. That's great transitioning. Like the virtual screenplay of like different graphics and different kind of VA stuff. The production there I thought was well done, was cool. Maybe a bit overbearing. But yeah, those are some of kind of my initial impressions. And as I was leaving, I was like, would I recommend this movie? You'll wait till the end to get our official ratings on a scale from 1 to 10 about what we think and whether we recommend it. But those are just some of my first ones, bro.
Okay. My first impressions, like you, that movie was way too long. It was entertaining. I agree that was the first thought I had. Like, that was fun. I went to see the movie. I was like, that was fun. Like, that was cool to watch. Like good graphics, screenplay, or whatever you call. I mean, the cinematography. Yeah, there it is.
That's a big word.
Too long. I thought they did a pretty good job, though, given the circumstances, given the fact that their lead actor, their main character, had passed away.
That's a good point.
And I was also struck by, a lot of the deeply religious themes that came up throughout the movie, which we're going to get into now, throughout this conversation. But were there any other initial impressions?
So I will say, before I went to the movie, I thought it was marketed as like a socially activist movie.
Yeah.
Right. So like, there's a lot of kind of cultural battles going on in the movie and stuff, and you can certainly read that into the film. I mean, there certainly is, I think, to some extent some of that going on in the film. But is it the sole motivator? I think that's also a reach. So. Yes, I thought that was also a reach. That being said, whether it's intent or not, it's great marketing.
Yeah.
You want to appeal to somebody and sell a movie? Tune into what we call the irrational passions, right?
Yeah.
The passions of anger, the passions of fear,
right?
And that's what they did. They marketed to that very well, and a lot of people kind of went in there, like kind of expecting all this, and then the movie's like, I was fun.
It was mild in terms of,
exactly, in terms of
statements.
Sure. And so I went in there with that kind of anticipation, like, okay, here we go again.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that bad. I think you, like I said, I think you can certainly abstract some things from it, but I think you could do that with any film if you look hard enough.
Right. Right. Okay. So, to you, Max.
Okay.
What were the best parts of this movie? What were some of the coolest things you saw? The themes that stood out to you the most that you think are worth talking about? The positives from Black Panther, Wakanda Forever.
I did like the mother figure in
the Queen.
What's her name? Her name's slipping me right now.
Like her character?
Yeah.
I forget her character's name. She's a good actress, though. She's very good. And she's also ripped.
I noticed that, dude. She got traps, bro. Mean traps. She was like sitting there talking, and her biceps were. I was like, that's impressive, dude. Right? Rawanada. Queen Rawanada.
Right. Queen Rawanada.
Got it. I thought her character was. She's a great actor. Okay. She's ripped.
Thank you very
much. My apologies.
Yeah.
She's ripped. And she, to me, played a figure of like value and integrity.
Yeah.
And that to me was appealing in her. The way that she kind of cared for her daughter. I mean, obviously she had undergone a lot of loss in her life.
Yeah.
Right. And so she didn't want to lose her daughter, but I think her kind of even giving her life to save her people, that to me was kind of stuck out. Some fun parts of it were, I do think it's kind of funny, the relevancy that they try to kind of portray on the films, even though like Wakanda's a made up place. It's like the relevancy of that going to a university setting.
Right.
And all of a sudden they're trying to be cool with like the students.
Yeah.
I was like, that's a cool play, and the way they did it seemed kind of organic, maybe,
Yeah, it's
kind of things.
You can kind of suspend your disbelief and like be like, oh,
yeah,
I could see that happening.
And yeah, I think like the ritualistic, because there was constant kind of, unfortunately, deaths in the film, and there was a lot of rituals tied into that. And actually, one of the things that I think stuck out to me most was the joy of the Wakandan people. They're very joyful, kind of an uplifting people that I enjoyed. And Talocan, the place under the sea, they also were kind of like just gentle people, for the most part.
Yeah.
So those are kind of some of the things.
Okay, you mentioned, so one of the things that stood out to me from the very get-go, so at the beginning of the movie, they immediately have to confront the problem of the former Black Panther being dead.
Yeah.
Right.
King T'Challa.
Because Chadwick Boseman had actually died. So it begins with this scene of Shuri, who becomes the new main character.
Yeah.
She is trying to create some sort of medicine or something to save T'Challa's life as he's dying, and fails. I mean, she can't do it.
Sure.
So immediately right there to start the movie, it's like, boom, this power of death that is very real, and that even Wakanda with your vibranium and all your science and technology.
And Shuri with her intelligence
with her
scientific.
You can't stop death.
Nope.
And I'll never forget, I went to, it was called the Rescue Project here in our city. Father John Ricardo. He came and he gave a talk. It's this great movement that he's doing all around the country, trying to renew parishes, reproclaiming the gospel in a new and energetic way. And he was himself telling the story about the first time he really experienced the power of death as something that was like a real power, something that he didn't have control over. Yeah. He had been a priest for many years and had, buried tons and tons of people. But it was when his father died, and he was there with his father when he died, and his father passed away, and Father Ricardo said that he could literally feel the warmth slowly, like progressively leaving his father's body, like from the bottom up. And in that moment, he said he was just overwhelmed with this awareness of the fact that when we talk about the human race being enslaved to the power of sin and death, it's real. Like, it's this reality that we know is not meant to be. Like, it's the destruction of our nature, but it's so real, and we need a savior. We need to be saved from it. So, and that can't be science and technology, no matter how sophisticated we get. So from the very get-go, that was something that,
and that was one of the frustrations of Shuri, right?
Exactly.
As like the film kind of unfolds, that's kind of one of her angers with this thing. It's like, why not?
Right.
And then all of a sudden you have kind of the mother figure, Rawanada, right? Queen Rawanada, respectively, kind of telling her daughter, guess what? This rationalistic approach you're having to death is not the solution.
It's not sufficient. Right.
It speaks to, if you will, death's key speaks to the heart. It's a spiritual thing too. Right. And I think that's one of the things that, again, going to, Queen Rawanada again, I think it's one of the reasons that I found her attractive. She was kind of like the wise element of her daughter's kind of intellectual capacity, because she's a smart girl, smart princess. But her mother kind of leveled her in this sense, and
was always reminding her people, her daughter, and then later the girlfriend of T'Challa, the former girlfriend of, I don't remember her character's name, but that she at one point she said, remember, you're a Wakandan, and for you, death is not the end. Death is only the beginning.
Sure.
Right. So that whole theme too throughout the whole movie of the reality of the afterlife. I really found attractive about the movie, and we'll talk about maybe some of the insufficiencies with their conception of the afterlife. But secondly, another thing that stood out to me that was a good thing was the liturgy of the ritual of this people.
Sure.
So this movie just reinforced a desire that I already really have, which is to visit Africa, because we know a bunch of people from Uganda, from our seminary, and I just hear that the Catholicism, especially in Uganda, well, first of all, their natural cultural heritage is very liturgical. Like they have a lot of rich cultural celebrations with music and dancing.
Sure.
And
like a service there might be 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, like Mass on a Sunday. People will walk from all over, spend the whole day worshiping, celebrating, praising together. And that came through in this movie, right? The kind of some of the heritage of the African culture. Sure. And this is the other interplay we'll talk about, is this tension between tradition and ritual and, for lack of a better word, religion and technology. Yeah. And rationalism. So
you see kind of a tension in this kind of, and that's kind of even in the beginning portions of the film, this kind of us versus them kind of systemic play here. I mean, you have that in one of the opening scenes where Queen Rawanada, after the burial of her son, goes into the courtroom. Right.
Yeah.
There's a judge, and there's these kind of global powers. I think France is there, U.S. is there, and I want to say Switzerland maybe was there. Somebody else.
These countries.
Yeah, and so they kind of go in, and there's these countries that, and if you remember the first Black Panther, there was kind of a global marketing of vibranium, and these countries had been promised that they would have access to this vibranium to a certain extent. However, Queen Rawanada now steps into the equation and says, no more of that, no more of that. Nobody will get vibranium because the vibranium itself is bad. She understands that the raw material is good, but she kind of has this quote: "It's not because I'm scared of what vibranium will do, but what you all will do with this vibranium." Right. So all of a sudden, it's like everybody else, this global effort of trying to kind of save and market and sell and protect their own countries becomes kind of diminished because of the Wakandan people not wanting anybody to kind of touch it or deal with it. But at that point, it had already been marketed and everybody knows about it.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's kind of hard once it's on the market, or at least potentially on the market, to kind of just abstract. But there's just play again. There's just us versus them. You have that there, but then you also have in Queen Rawanda's conversations with her daughter, right? So like when after the burial. Yeah. Right. There's also this scene where Queen Rawanada and Princess Shuri go out to the beach.
This is 1 year after the death of T'Challa, and they've been mourning for a year. Yeah. And now she takes her daughter out to the beach for this kind of ritual.
Yeah. And so she invites her out to this, and her mother recognizes this would be good for her daughter to kind of heal.
Yeah.
Right. Because why? Because working, no matter how smart you are, no matter how much work or productivity you're doing, when somebody dies, you don't just kind of let it go and forget about it, right? That's not how that works. You have to mourn a loss, right? That's what we say, like, crying is okay. Being upset is okay. Questioning God, asking him, begging him, imploring his name upon somebody that you love is okay and even necessary. Right? And so here's this mother who loves her daughter, takes her out to the ocean side and says, hey, I think this is what we need, right? And her daughter, I think rightly, was kind of angry,
furious,
because the kind of ritualistic approach, or the approach of the Wakandan people, was if we have these rituals, if we have these traditions, they'll help us mourn the loss of our loved ones, of our ancestors. But the daughter didn't see it that way.
No,
right? She saw it as kind of a, what does she call it? Like a composite of the mind.
So her mom is trying to tell her that her mom had experienced comfort and consolation
in doing this,
from coming out to do this ritual, and she sat in silence. She just sat, allowed herself to grieve and to mourn. And she said she felt the spirit of T'Challa basically come and like lay a hand upon her shoulder, and that brought her great comfort and peace. And Shuri says to her mom, like, very harshly. So this is like, this is a mom this is a girl who just like gives no what's anymore. She's like,
I don't know what.
She's like, Mom, that's BS pretty much. That was a construct of your mind. Yeah. You're making this up to try to make yourself feel better about this reality of death that we don't have an answer for. Yeah. And that's really just final. T'Challa hasn't gone on anywhere. Yeah. He doesn't reside with the ancestors. Sure. He just doesn't exist.
And that's it. And we have to learn to bear that, kind of white knuckle this death.
Exactly.
And get through it. But her mother's like, no. you and I are going to burn this robe of T'Challa, King T'Challa's, together as a kind of a departing, detaching from this mourning that we have.
And she refuses.
And she does. And in fact, she says, I'm not going to burn this coat, right? If I sit here and think about my brother's death too long, I'm going to burn the world and everything in it.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's this kind of fester in the daughter's soul and Princess Shuri's soul that like death has built kind of resentment in her. But her mother, again, being the leveling, the balancing kind of act here, like this is good for us. We need this.
Yeah.
Right. So like, it's not just about the physical. It's not just about the science. It's not just about the intellectual. There's something kind of transcendent in this experience that's necessary to mourn properly, to be happy properly.
But I have to say, I mean, how many people today are inculcated into this ideology, this worldview, that really all there is matter?
Yeah.
It's a materialistic worldview. And all these rituals that have been handed down to us from in America, we really don't have too many rituals anymore. That's why I want to keep turkey on Thanksgiving.
I feel you.
Because we have that's a tradition that we need.
Yeah.
But seriously, the whole concept of tradition is super important.
Yeah.
Right? Things that have been handed down to us from our elders, from our ancestors. And there are so many people today who are A, disconnected from any kind of tradition, but B, so imbued with this rationalistic mindset, this materialistic mindset, that they really do just have to confront this idea that there's death, there's nothing we can do about that, and then once it comes, that's it. That's final.
And this idea of like this construct of religion to help cope with death is very Marxist.
And Marxist and Feuerbach,
yes, right. It's actually, you're right. Actually, Karl Marx takes up Feuerbach.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, that's like a very kind of atheistic approach to the world. Again, in this particular context, she's grieving the loss of her brother.
Right.
Right. And so maybe it's an expression of that. But at the same time, a lot of people actually live by that philosophy constantly. And that, as we go, as I've said, and maybe you would agree, it's a very nihilistic approach to reality. Because why? Because if the material world is all there is, then in fact, these rituals don't matter. Prayer, spirituality doesn't matter. Then everything
None of
else
it matters.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing matters.
And so, except matter. Matter matters. What's up?
Except it doesn't. It's just random
collection of things, right? But then what does her mom ask her? Right? That's a great question.
So
like
this is
right.
Cool.
So her daughter says this to her mom. This is a construct of your mind to help you cope with this death,
to help you feel better.
Yeah. She's like, is that so? Like, what construct does your mind make? Does it build torment or comfort?
Yeah.
Clearly, it's torment in her daughter's mind.
Right.
Clearly, it's torment. And the rest of the film, or at least some of the film, kind of she expresses that.
So this is the big question. So, her mother very wisely says, okay, even if it is a construct of my mind, you have a construct of your mind too.
Sure.
Namely that the material world is all there is. Yeah. You can't prove that for sure. And what does that bring you? Does that bring you comfort like mine brings me? Now, obviously, that's not a proof that the mother's right. Right? Sure. That's not a rational deduction that proves that the mother is actually right, just because she experiences comfort. And so there's a lot of atheists out there who might think, okay, just because religion brings you comfort doesn't mean it's true.
Sure.
And that's valid. Yeah. That's true. But we were talking about this reminds us of Blaise Pascal, his wager.
Sure.
Right? And one of the things he said is like, okay, and this is just kind of thinking philosophically. Okay, if you have two choices before you, to live as if God existed or to live as if he doesn't. If you live as if God existed and you kind of immerse yourself in ritual and liturgy and prayer, and you try to follow the moral precepts that are handed down through religion, you have absolutely nothing to lose in doing that.
Yeah.
All you have to do is like gain something, namely comfort and like happiness that people who practice religion statistically seem to have more than people who don't. If you reject that and you don't, and you decide to live as if God didn't exist, you have nothing to gain.
Nope.
And really, I mean, everything.
Nothing to
lose.
Nothing
really.
to lose. Yeah.
So basically, Pascal was thinking like, okay, just from a purely rational standpoint, why not just give it a try, right? Like, why not just live as if God existed? Why not just play the game?
Yeah.
And see what happens if you do? And it's kind of an intriguing way of thinking, you know.
Yeah. And so that's certainly what it seems to be in a certain example here. It's like that's a probing.
That's what the mom was
exactly.
saying,
That's
right?
like the probing question. It's like what I'm experiencing, what I've experienced through these rituals and through our ancestry tradition and through kind of religion, if you will, have brought not just me but kind of the universal Wakandan people to a great comfort in learning to deal with this. And I can't tell you with certainty that this is the correct answer, but I can tell you that it's not bringing torment like it's bringing you torment in your approach with this thing. But again, it's not a certainty necessarily. It's a probing of the heart. Where do you stand and where are you?
Yeah.
Talking here, being more, if you will, phenomenological. What is your experience of this thing? And the way that you're telling me right now, the way you're expressing to me that this is manifesting isn't good.
Yeah.
Right.
And don't you think there's maybe a little bit of hubris on the part of Shuri to say that what all of her ancestors have believed and passed down is just completely ludicrous and ridiculous, right?
And so that's kind of the pretentious part of here, the new generation versus the old generation. And we all do it to some extent. We've all done it to some extent. Oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Oh, she's not up to date with cool. Or my dad's, he's just being lame again. Oh, whatever. Like it's easily dismissing those who have come before us in the name of irrelevancy.
Yeah.
Right. Yet we would say we learn from our elders because they're wiser than us. Always better, always more hygienic, always better looking, always more athletic. Not necessarily, but we would assume that our elders do possess a level of knowledge and wisdom that we as the younger generation do not. And at least in that sense, we respect our elders, at least on one level.
Yeah.
Okay, so this happens, right? This scene happens. And later on, what you have, it's like in the movie, you have this machine that is able to track vibranium. Right. You have this machine that's able to track vibranium. One of, I think, 2 ever produced.
Yeah.
And you have one girl who's able to produce this machine. You have one person. Okay. There's a whole scavenging to try to find where she is. They find her, and then interesting character or peoples enter the scene, which is unique in the Black Panther, and I think the Marvel storyline. You have these. Talocan people, you have with their leader Namor come in, right? And these are kind of water sea creatures that, can they survive, and they have a whole under water world.
So they originated like in the Middle Ages, like in the period of colonization.
Yeah, it's like 14th, 15th century.
Yeah, and they had, I forget exactly what even happened. Like they had been faced with trial, and then they ended up drinking this potion that they found, and it gave them the ability to breathe and exist underwater, so they fled from society. And Namor, this guy, he was human.
His mom took the potion.
His mom was human.
That's right.
When she conceived him, and then took the potion, and then he was born. It was kind of incarnational, fully human, also fully of the sea, right?
Yeah.
Like, and he could exist on both, and he had wings on his ankles. And
that's pretty sick.
And then he went back to his homeland at one point and found his people enslaved by the colonizers.
By colonizers, and that is one of the critiques that I kind of want to be kind of on. So like, there's a huge history with conquistadors and colonizers in Mexico. And so like, there's this battle with like, Namor, now the powerful. At the time, he was a young man.
Yeah.
Right? He came back and kind of was expressing his frustration.
Yeah.
And started kind of slaying
burned everything down.
So him and his crew here, the Talocan people, started burning down the cities that the conquistadors had built this kind of empire for themselves off of what he would say the slavery of his people. There was a scene in there though that I found kind of frustrating because it was a religious priest that was on the floor. That he gets his name from Namor, from
Niño sin amor,
right? The child without love.
Yeah.
And you see in the film that kind of is reinforced, at least on a certain level, because what you see in Namor is of hatred kind of unfolding and even proposing kind of a conquest of the world to the Wakandan people.
Yeah.
Right. And there is a level of like that statement proves to be true in the film. But I will say, I don't know if this is a kind of the intention of the director, but they were trying to kind of bring the audience into the life of Namor.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel that
it was not
intimate.
successful
No,
at all.
I don't think so. In fact, I made it more confusing.
He was not like a lot of villains, like Thanos, for example.
Yeah.
You can kind of relate to Thanos because he's got like a decent intention.
Yeah.
Like he's trying to bring balance to the universe based on an experience he has. So most villains are pursuing some good in their own minds that you can at least relate to. This guy was like, I couldn't even follow him.
Yeah.
And I didn't, like you said, I didn't like those implicit jabs at the church. He mentioned like these colonizers with their dogma and superstition or whatever,
religion,
came over and
language,
us,
which is Spanish would be,
which is an unnuanced and unfair black and white depiction of historical events that don't accurately portray reality in their totality, even though there was slavery and bad things that took place during the conquest.
And so going into the water, right, these people going into the water is kind of their way of opting out of having to deal with these people in the war that they were kind of ensuing on their heritage. And so I don't know, that's kind of one of my critiques.
That's a critique of the movie. Not only the implicit jabs at the church, but an unrelatable and kind of unintelligible villain. Who was just kind of like weird.
Yeah. And that comes from me, who's a Mexican, okay? Who's like, I'm trying to relate to this
Mexican guy, right?
Yeah, he is. So his heritage is like the heritage of this villain is based out of Mexican region. And I was just like, I don't know, man. So I think it's you're reaching a little bit. Mm-hmm. I'm glad they have a Mexican actor and Mexican people in it. But I don't think it did him or the people justice, to be fair.
Yeah.
I do think the character was kind of cool. I did like the soundtracks they had with it, very kind of native in soil.
Yeah.
They were very strong people, very kind of fierce, warrior-like.
Right.
Even brutish to a certain extent, here positively speaking. But I didn't think it did him justice. And I certainly don't think they tied in this character with the film very well. Yeah.
Yeah, and he starts going on he starts doing what we said is never permissible in our episode on Just War, which you can go back and listen to. Which
What's up, dude?
He starts trying to start wars to establish peace.
Yeah.
Right. He starts trying to go after, in order to like protect himself and his people. He starts going after other people and like, and then trying to draw Wakanda into that. And there's this weird intermingling of relationships between them. And he tries to draw Shuri, the princess of Wakanda now, or the queen of Wakanda now, after her mother dies. Yeah. And so that whole plot line, it's like, it was a stretch. It was hard to follow.
Right.
So
I think taking a little bit, so like you have the manifestation of Namor and his people and Talocan people, and then you have princess get abducted by these people.
Yeah.
Then you have an attempt of Namor to bring the Wakandan people to his
to form an alliance.
To form an alliance, right? They say no. They take her. They take Princess Shuri from her. The Wakanda people take her. Well, I should say her sister.
Yeah.
It takes her from her, and then you have a revolt from the Talocan people.
Yeah.
To go attack Wakanda.
They come and attack Wakanda.
Then the mother dies.
Then the mom dies. That's right.
Then the mom dies, and now Queen Shuri is the head. But here again, as I mentioned earlier, you have this play again of us versus them.
Yeah.
Right? Us versus them. And obviously this is a Marvel movie. There's going to be action and war and strife and difficulties and tensions. But you have this idea of like, if we hate hard enough and we get our hatred together and we make it into this ball of force and we exert it on the world, we'll get the order we're seeking. We'll get the love and joy and peace that our whatever is desiring, you know? And again, Namor kind of, this villain plays that role again. And also, they say he's a villain in the film. He clearly is. He's just doing a lot of destruction. But there's also a connection between him and the Wakandan people. And the way their scene ends, it's like they're in an alliance.
Yeah, that's how. Yeah, but the ending of the movie too is ambiguous.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
Okay, but so Namor comes and attacks Wakanda because they killed one of his people as they were getting Shuri out of there, and then he says we're going to come back in a week.
Yeah.
To either you guys can either join us or we're going to destroy you.
Yeah.
So he gives them this one final offer. Meantime, they bury the queen, and there's this other liturgy, right? There's a second ritual liturgy that
very much like the first
for King T'Challa. And again, the reason I point that out is because to me it speaks of the very primordial instinct within man
Yeah.
to treat death as a sacred event, right? As something that is worth ritualizing in our burial of the dead, that's something that's sacred. This is not just a piece of matter that we're discarding and putting in the ground. This is a person who we loved and who we had a relationship with, and who has now moved on past this life and is probably experiencing some sort of divine reality now. So, and you know, people like Pope Benedict will say that if you look at all the pre-Christian religions and rituals and even pagan ceremonies, they all kind of are intimations, instincts within the heart of man that are speaking of his religious nature, right? Yeah. Man is a religious being, the Catechism says, but also all of them ultimately find their culmination in Jesus Christ,
right?
And in the Eucharist, in the Mass. Like, that's the culmination, Pope Benedict will say, of all, and he'll be actually, he can tell you why, because he studied all these other cultures and religions in a way that I haven't, but like, he'll say that, and he'll make the claim that the Mass, the sacrifice of the Mass, is the fulfillment towards which all the pre-Christian pagan rituals and traditions were intrinsically pointed towards. That Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of the religious aspiration within man for the transcendent, for relationship with God. Yeah. And that's why liturgy is so important. That's why ritual is so important, and it shouldn't just be discarded for the sake of technology or rationalism.
Right, and I think that that kind of speaks to one of the things that is central to the film that I personally thought it was worth kind of reviewing, and I think you did too. That's one of the reasons we brought it up, is precisely because there's this deeply religious element to it, particularly in the way that kind of afterlife is portrayed in death. And I think, going back to what you just said, like, man is a religious being, right? And like, what do we mean by that? What a religious being, right? A religiare, right? To be connected to something, to be bound to something, to be pulled out and to be connected to something else, right? To be bound.
And to be oriented towards the infinite.
Exactly.
Towards the transcendent.
Right. So we would say, like, Luigi Giussani, blessed Luigi Giussani, right? Says the subject.
Is he a blessed?
Yeah, blessed Luigi Giussani.
That's so sick.
It is so sick. The subject's oriented towards the capital O other, God. Yeah. Right? So man is kind of wired to be in communion, right, with the eternal other, God. Also man, right, in communion. He's kind of prompted towards it. And how do we see that? I mean, one of the ways we would say we kind of express ritual, something simple as, preparing to go to bed. What do we do? We do certain things.
We have rituals.
We have rituals. Routines. Yeah, we
preparing for a meal, right?
Maybe you pray.
Set
maybe
the table.
Set
right?
the table.
Do that type of stuff.
And we have these holidays that are kind of a, if you will, a pseudo, or not pseudo, maybe what's the word here? Para ritual expression. You have waking up. What do you do when you get up? I mean, you have all these kinds of things, right? We sing happy birthday songs. That's kind of weird if it's not your birthday, Right. You go to church, these guys are wearing robes or whatever. This would be weird if it didn't have some context, you know what I mean? The collar would be weird. But in fact, we would say, no, these kinds of things speak to something that's kind of hierarchical, to use kind of here Augustinian language. It's like there's something in us that we value to certain degrees, and the things we value most end up on the top of the hierarchical structure, and we worship. That's when we would say, like, and that's kind of the scriptural kind of context here, right? So like in the Old Testament, when worship goes wrong, all seems to tumble down and fall. And the idea of like the prophets is to kind of reestablish a right worship, a right religiosity that's kind of intertwined in the heart of man, given to us by God, because we're rational beings, and we want to kind of give creation back to God. And then in the New Testament, what do we have is our Lord Jesus Christ perfectly offering creation back to the Father. Right? And so apply that to something like even this movie, for example. There is this religion expression constantly of, as Joey was making the point, the rationalistic approach to the world, the materialistic approach to the world, this chemical exertion of components kind of colliding together to give you some sort of comfort is not sufficient. And we know that. Our heart knows that. Love is not tangible for concepts. Ideas are not purely tangible. These things that are so intimate to us, these values that are so intimate to us, are not merely empirical, right? And so all of a sudden we say, well, there must be something deeper to us. Well, yeah, there is. We're desiring community again, or communion with God, right? With the transcendent in that sense. And the way that this movie kind of portrays it, it's like, we need to bring about music. We need to bring about dancing. We need to bring about the campfire and the burning of this robe. We need to bring about proper mourning in order to do what? In order to be who we are.
In order to be human beings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In order to be, and one of the scenes in the movies that I thought was kind of, two things that I thought were also provocative in line with this was, one, at the burial of Queen Ramonda, the tribal leader M'Baku, remember, was with
Shuri.
Now Queen Shuri. And M'Baku had said, your brother told me to watch over you and to be here with you, so I'm not going to leave, you know? And Shuri is kind of challenged with the question, like, what are we going to do now? And Shuri responds, my heart was buried with my mother, you know? And then all of a sudden, like, this sort of frustration arises in her, this kind of anger and hatred.
Yeah, he asks her, she's asking him what they should do, and he says, what does your heart tell you?
Yeah.
And she says, my heart was buried
that's
with
what
my
it was.
mother.
That's right. So my heart was buried with my mother.
Mm-hmm.
But what wasn't then? Her passions?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, what's left over.
Yeah, what's left over,
Yeah.
right, if that's the case. And it's just a provocative line. Obviously, I don't think it's fully exhaustive there or exhausted there. But my point is, like, there is this kind of, again, if the highest values are not set aright, then what shows? What shows? You know? Is it just our emotions? I mean, that's what you have in a lot of the world today. It's kind of emotive expression, you know? But no, we would say rationality, love should be the guide of all our action. Proper love, perfect worship, you know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of taking some of this and applying it to kind of the Christian framework.
Yeah.
You know, that'd be a way of kind of looking at this.
And again, so yeah, after this is like kind of the final blow to Shuri, because like she doesn't believe in the afterlife. She doesn't believe in anything other than the material universe.
Yeah.
At least at first. And when her mom dies, that's like, okay, that's it. Then she's kind of like dead too now,
yeah.
right? So she's just, now she becomes this vengeance-seeking, like obsessive animal, really, who just wants to destroy the world that has been so brutal to her. Which again happens in the world today for people who don't have the eyes of faith. But one of the things we were going to mention was, okay, so one of the things that ultimately comes to play in this movie is the idea of the afterlife. Yeah. Which is, for me as a Christian, like it's good to see that being portrayed in a positive light, right?
Yeah, I agree. The
existence of the afterlife. But what is the afterlife for?
And also just to be in connection with what you're saying, also the connection with the ancestors.
Yeah.
Right. Which is a play here that's going on, which is not in a lot of other films that you see. Is like the fact that you're even able to communicate or in some way affect them.
Right.
Is kind of
so we was unique. I mean, so the afterlife for them is just and the world after death. You go to join the ancestors, they say, right? Yeah. And in fact, in the Black Panther ritual, when you become the Black Panther, you encounter one of the ancestors. Yeah. So we would say that's good. Like and in the Christian vision, we understand like the communion of saints, right? We do have ancestors. We are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses on whom we can rely for prayer and intercession and to whom we're ultimately connected. But the Black Panther movie stops there, right? So for the Wakandans, all that there is after this life is just with the ancestors. And to me, that begs the question, okay, but like who's supporting the existence of the ancestors? Like what is the ground upon which even the ancestors continue to have their existence after this life is over? And ultimately the answer to the question is God, but that's not brought up. That's not addressed. That's not going to obviously be addressed in a Marvel movie typically. Yeah. But so that was like, it's like they're getting there, but they're not quite there. They're not quite to like the existence of this transcendent other, this transcendent ground of all that is, even like those living and those who have moved on to the next life. That's not present in this movie. Yeah. So, and Pope Benedict, one of the things he'll say is that if you look at ancient religions, ancient cultures, ancient peoples, you'll see this two different ways that people tried to grasp at eternal life. And he'll say the first way is through descendants. So I want as many descendants as I can possibly get. And if I'm someone who's barren or can't produce offspring, that's seen as a curse. Yeah. Why? Because in a certain way I continue to exist through them, through my descendants, right? So that's man's natural aspiration for eternal life manifesting itself. Or another way that the natural manifestation for the desire for eternal life makes itself present is through my desire for fame. So if I become great, if I make a great name for myself, then I will live on in the minds and memories of the future generations, right? Sure. But what Pope Benedict ultimately says, obviously both of these things, either having descendants or having a great name that lives on in the hearts and minds of your generations, both of those are insufficient, because it's not really you who continues to exist. Mm-hmm. What is necessary for our desire for eternal life to be fulfilled is for you, your I, right? Your person, your consciousness, your self, your soul to continue to exist. And that can only happen if you exist not in the minds and memories of future generations, but in the mind and memory of the one whose very thought is existence itself, which is God.
Say, that was awesome.
Yeah.
Metaphysics.
Yeah.
Well done.
So we exist because God thought us. Yeah. And we will continue to exist after this life because God will continue thinking us and keeping us in existence.
Yeah.
So yeah, just this thought about like this realm where ancestors exist, that's not sufficient. It's valid to for what it's worth.
Yeah, because we do stand on the shoulders of giants. Like we stand on the shoulders of giants, and we aspire to be like those great who have come before us. But that's not it. Right.
That's not the end.
Their goodness, their beauty, their truth here, right, only reflects partially the goodness, truth, and beauty of the Creator. Mm-hmm. Right.
And they could not continue to exist unless they too were being thought by the mind, who is the Logos, who is responsible for it all.
And so, as the kind of movie wraps up, right? So you have this kind of
we have a resolution to some of these themes.
Yeah, right. And so you have a tension arising between the Wakandan people, the global efforts, right, of the countries, kind of still seeking vibranium, but the tension really arises between the Talocan people and the Wakandan people when they go to war with each other.
Yes, they do go to war.
So they end up going to war with each other because of kind of the hatred expression of both, and they're both kind of mad at the world, and they're both kind of, seeking control, seeking stability, but by their own means. And so there's this tension.
And something that you see at play is that the people themselves, they don't really care about like the other group, right? So like the tribal leader of the
Mbaku.
What's his name? Yeah, Mbaku. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to go to war, and his people don't want to go to war. But who wants to go to war? Shuri, the queen.
Yeah.
And so just because of her own private interests and her own divided heart and anger and desire for vengeance, now a whole people gets wrapped up in this conflict that they're going to fight in because they're defending their own, but that they're and how often does that happen in the real world, right? Where it's just political interests, selfishness of leaders and kings wraps all these people up into wars and just brings about destruction and death. So I noticed that in there too.
Yeah, and I think that's Shuri says that, like, I want someone dead. I want Namor dead.
Yeah.
Right? It really just says like I really don't care about what my elders want, right? Because there's this fight. It's
or
like,
my people.
Or my people want. It's about what I want. Mm-hmm. Right now, it's about what I want. Mm-hmm. And what I want is this guy dead. You know? So hatred consumes and expresses itself through destruction. Right? And that's one of the themes here that's lingering. But at the end, surprisingly, after the battle, after the great battle, and all this comes together, there's this scene, kind of as the movie's closing down, where Namor and King Shuri, or Black Panther now. Well, sorry, before we get there, Queen Shuri finds the potions necessary, right? And the Wakandan people.
She becomes the Black Panther.
Yeah, she
reinvents the purple,
the vibranium flower thing that the chemical that they take in.
And again, she doesn't go through the rituals that are typically associated with it. She just does it in the lab, right?
Scientifically.
She's like, just pour it into me, and I'll be the Black Panther.
And she has a negative experience.
Yeah, because of that,
right?
I think
she has a negative experience. Nevertheless, she does gain the powers. They thought it was a failed attempt, but it wasn't. It was successful. She had the powers. They built her the costume. War breaks out. War is almost done. Here are the two heads, Namor and Queen Shuri, or Black Panther. And at the time when Queen Shuri is about to kill Namor, has him at her disposal, her mother appears.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, so the negative experience entailed her cousin, which I can't remember his name. It's for the first Black Panther. Michael B. Jordan played the character. And so anyways, and he was ambitious. He was defamed in the Wakandan kind of legacy. But he is the one that made vibranium popular. And so that they had the negative experience. She was not happy about it. But now, as she's about to strike Namor dead, the mother appears. And the mother says, show him who you are. Show him who you are. So in a moment where she could have easily killed him right there, and the rest of the Talocan people been disposed of, that's not what happens. What happens is mercy, not vengeance. You have Queen Shuri all of a sudden kind of reduce through the power of the spiritual realm, through the spiritual kind of encounter, reduce the hatred and kind of level the playing field. Again, her mother and her spiritual comfort and all this stuff becomes to arise. So you had hatred at one point, you had torment, and now all of a sudden this ritualistic, this spiritual encounter becomes the medicine, if you will, the antidote to this arising tension and almost murder of Namor, right? And so I thought it was interesting because who is she? Who is the Wakandan people? Because that's who she represents ultimately, right? Queen Shuri represents the Wakandan people. Who are you? Right, that's
They're
a
people
question.
who see beyond this life, right? They're
a person of mercy, a people of mercy, right? A people of community. And then you have, and this is where I was like, what, happened? Because good, the mercy is good. So mercy reigns in this instance. Vengeance has consumed us, right? Oh, that was one of the lines too. Vengeance has consumed us.
She says that,
right?
Namor.
But it will not consume our people. And then the kind of frame switches, and then all of a sudden, this is what I don't get. Namor and her are riding together.
Yeah, and they've formed an alliance now, and there's peace between the people.
I don't know what that means. I don't know. That's a resolution I didn't understand.
And then at the end, Namor would still seem to be like planning to go back and get the Wakandans again. So ambiguous ending there. But
maybe y'all can shed light on it. Maybe our listeners can kind of shed some light.
The theme of mercy definitely comes through. And then finally, at the very end, this is the big resolution I think of the whole movie is Shuri goes to Haiti to visit the
Haiti, you mean?
Haiti, yes,
That's
to
right.
visit the sister, or not the sister, the who ends up being the mother of T'Challa's son, which is revealed after the credits.
Sister-in-law.
To see her sister-in-law. And she performs the ritual that her mom had tried to get her to perform way back at the beginning of the movie. So she goes to the shore of the beach and she burns the burial cloths, I think, of her mother.
Yeah, that's right.
It would have been a year after. And she actually finally takes this moment after all this time to sit in silence. She closes her eyes and she has all these memories of T'Challa and her mother. Yeah. And it shows her having great peace and like crying and experiencing consolation and joy that her mother promised her she would experience if she actually allowed herself to think beyond just this materialistic world. So that was a good resolution. It was a moment of prayer, really, is what it was. Again, insufficient because for all intents and purposes, it could have just been a construct of her mind. It could have just been memories that she was having of her brother T'Challa. For really to have consolation in the face of death, we need God to reveal himself to us. Thanks be to God, he has done that in the sending of his son and his death and resurrection. But for what it's worth for this movie, I thought it was good.
Yeah, and
it was a conclusion in favor of ritual, tradition, even prayer, belief in the afterlife. Those are all good things in my book. Yeah,
and also I do want to, unless y'all think we were just being a complete kind of contrast between science and religion here and ritual, I think the way the movie actually ends, and this is a question for you, Joey, and our listeners, if you want to comment below what you think, I do think that religion and science ultimately end up complementing each other.
In harmony.
Yeah, because like the way it ends, it's like actually, so yes, she kind of avoided, Queen Shuri avoided the custom of the people. But she still did rely on the spiritual experiences to both kind of propel her to go to war, but also to cease the kind of the anger when her mother showed herself again. And like you said, the ending seemed to kind of reinforce the tradition that her mother had tried to teach her at one point in her life. And so now you have kind of Queen Shuri becoming a wise figure through her scientific kind of endeavors, but also through the spiritual experiences she had building up to that moment.
Yeah, and the traditions of her people.
Yeah, so it's like, I don't know if there was a complete denial of the kind of ritualistic, but I do think that you see kind of a complementarity, and I think that's a good way to end it. I personally felt that that was one of the strong suits of the end of the film, along with kind of religion and the afterlife and death and the play on it and the need to mourn properly, these things. I did think that was kind of one of the strong suits of it. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of the analysis of the logos on the new Black Panther Wakanda Forever film.
1 to 10. What are you rating this? What are you giving this movie?
I always hate when people ask this question.
Well, you're the one who typically asks it.
That's right. On a scale from 1 to 10, I give it like a 6, maybe.
That's what I was going to give it too.
Okay. I'll give it like a 6 because of the way the story to me seems very fragmented.
I would wait to don't go spend money on it for the theaters. Wait till it comes out on Disney Plus or something.
I think you're right.
And then, but I mean, it's fun. It's entertaining.
It is entertaining.
It's
It's your classic Marvel action blow up things.
But because it's so popular, we had to talk about it.
Yeah.
But if you were thinking about going to watch it, I'm not gonna encourage you to go watch it, but I'm also not gonna say don't go watch it. That's as clear as I can be.
That's so clear, dude. I will say this: there was a student yesterday that I was talking to, and she was all in love with this movie. She's like, "Oh yeah, I'm going for the 4th time."
Oh,
I'm like, I hate to tell you that I didn't think it was that interesting. She's like, "What?" I'm like, "I know, I'm sorry, but like also let's talk about why you think it's interesting. Maybe you can help illuminate my experience, or help shed light on it." Her arguments weren't very good. Sorry, but at the same time, when you do watch it, we'd love to hear what you think of it. Yeah. And cool. That's what we got for you today, guys. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Logos Podcast. And as always, God bless.